I was able to serve on the Transportation Advisory Panel, and as conversations were occurring related to how do we start the shift from fossil fuels to zero emission technology, it became apparent that we really had a lot of work to do in educating the industry on what, kind of where things were going, both at the state level and the federal level, as well as obviously certain cities have some pretty big initiatives as well. And understanding that in New York, the vast majority of our companies are small carriers, small business, that don't have resources available to them to invest in electric trucks and building out charging stations in their facilities. So, what were other things that they could do?
Welcome to Stream, a trucktractortrailer.com production. My name is Zach Miller. I'm your host. And as I've mentioned on this podcast numerous times, I am honored to represent the Metro region on the board of directors for the Trucking Association of New York. I'm joined today by the president of the Trucking Association of New York, Kendra Hems, to talk about a really cool event that Tanny is putting on. This is the second year Tanny's putting this on. It's called Clean Trucks New York. It's going to be taking place in Buffalo on July 25th and 26th. Kendra, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Zach. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So let's talk. So this is the second year of this Clean Trucks New York conference that you put on. So what's the history of it, and why did Tanny decide to really take the reins here and put this conference together?
So it actually started after New York State passed the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is New York's environmental act. It addresses all segments of the economy, but certainly there's a pretty massive focus on transportation and trucks specifically. And as part of that, I was able to serve on the Transportation Advisory Panel, and as conversations were occurring related to how do we start the shift from fossil fuels to zero emission technology, it became apparent that we really had a lot of work to do in educating the industry on what, kind of where things were going, both at the state level and the federal level, as well as obviously certain cities have some pretty big initiatives as well. And understanding that in New York, the vast majority of our companies are small carriers, small business, that don't have resources available to them to invest in electric trucks and building out charging stations in their facilities. So, what were other things that they could do? So the intent of the conference was really twofold. It was to educate on what was happening, rules and regulations that were coming down the pike related to zero emission vehicle, various initiatives, related to zero emission vehicle, but also from a smaller carrier perspective, primarily, how do they get there? How do they get from a diesel engine to ultimately down the road, a zero emission, utilizing alternative fuels, or what we would call bridge fuels, or other options or other technology. So it was really meant to be both informative, educational, but also to give resources to the industry to start to prepare for this.
I think that's perfect. And certainly I was at the event last year. It was a terrific event. I was pretty blown away by it. And one of the interesting things also that people can't see, because it does tend to happen behind closed doors, is the education on the other end, right? Like the education with regulators and environmental advocates about some of the challenges that fleets do have incorporating these zero emission vehicles into their fleets, and why, certainly the subsidies are so important, but also why they have to have realistic timelines in place. They can't just say, hey, 2025, every commercial vehicle, class 6 and above has to be electric, and snap your fingers and have it happen. They need to have a realistic timeline. And I think these are the type of conversations that get them there.
Yes, absolutely. And that's another key part of this particular conference, because you'll have, regulators present, you'll have industry present, and it's a great way to encourage those types of discussions. Because to your point, Zach, the entities that regulate the industry do need to be educated. They're not familiar with how this industry operates on, a day-to-day basis. So those conversations are really, really important. I think we've made some headway in that area, but we're facing some pretty strong headwinds from the environmental advocates. We've got a tough road in terms of ensuring that the movement toward zero emission vehicle is done in a manner where the industry can keep up, and that we're not inadvertently, putting companies out of business or putting new burdens or costs on them that they can't afford. Like, I think in general, the industry is very supportive of environmental initiatives, of trying to reduce our impact on the environment, but we have to do this in a way that makes sense. We can't force it down the throat of companies that just don't have the resources to comply. And then the other side of it is trying to get a better understanding of where the state stands in building out the necessary pieces to support that shift. And it's not just the charging infrastructure. I mean, that is obviously critical. We have to have places for these trucks to charge if we do go into electric trucks, but it's also the financing, it's the grid preparedness, like is the grid going to be able to accommodate this new draw on electricity? So there's a lot of pieces that we don't yet know where the state stands that we're also trying to get a handle on as we prepare for this.
Absolutely. And there is that, obviously this conference has been on the books for about a year now, but what do you call it, coincidence or whatever, there is the elephant in the room, which is the surging diesel prices, and the fact that operating a heavy diesel fleet is incredibly expensive to do right now. I could tell you that from where I sit, we've had owner operators secure working capital just to buy fuel. That's the world we live in right now. And so the question is, as fleets look to the 2023, 2024, 2025, could these zero emission vehicles really, is there a cost benefit analysis that really makes sense to start that shift now, as opposed to waiting because of the uncertainty in diesel and oil?
Yeah, and I think there's a challenge there, because for some segments of the industry that may make sense. If you're a carrier that is typically in an urban environment, you're very local, you're starting and ending at your terminal, then it may make sense. Start looking at it now, look at what financing options are out there. A lot of the utilities are now looking at programs to assist with the build out of that charging infrastructure. But if you're a long haul fleet, unfortunately, we're not there, and we're not going to be there for quite some time. So I think this is going to be very segmented in terms of the rollout of EV. But yeah, the diesel prices certainly are not helping. Could potentially motivate, I guess, carriers to start looking at that. But I think it's not necessarily going to be going into specifically electric. I think it's more looking at what those bridge fuels are, and are there other things that they can do in terms of improving their own efficiencies and productivity, utilizing new technology that can reduce their reliance on diesel as much as possible.
I totally agree. And I'm sure this is going to come as no surprise to the viewers and listeners here, but I'm going to give myself a little plug. I will be moderating that panel on new and emerging technologies, so that, companies that obviously want to save money on fuel and emissions and some of these other things, but aren't able to incorporate new fuels into their fleet, there are options available to really help with that efficiency and help lower costs while doing right by the environment. So it's a really exciting conference, jam-packed. Like I said, it's that Monday, there's going to be a reception, and then that Tuesday, the 26th, is the conference. Really interesting panels from regulators to advocates to fleets, to those emerging technologies. Really just a full-on lesson in what's coming in terms of zero emission vehicles and how to pay for that all.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think another piece of it too is there is a truck showcase. So we'll have exhibitors there that will have different services on display that they can talk about, that can assist, particularly in the world of the small fleets that need to make transitions, utilizing whether it's alternative fuels or new technology. But we also have trucks on site, zero emission electric. I'm not sure if we have a hydrogen truck that'll be there, but it's a great opportunity to kind of get in the truck and the look, the feel, talk to some of the OEMs about the capabilities of those vehicles. Again, just with the idea of planning. We do have a session devoted to the advanced clean truck rule, which New York recently adopted. That comes into effect with our OEMs in 2024. And then we suspect that we're going to see that clean fleet rule shortly thereafter. So that's another key reason to come to this conference, to learn what all that means, because this isn't something that the state's just talking about anymore. There's been years of them talking about, environmental initiatives and how to clean up, quote unquote, the trucking industry. But now they're actually putting things in place to do that. And we need to make sure that the industry is prepared for what's coming.
Absolutely. There's going to, you could check the description for information related to the conference, to register, sponsor, hotel information, all that fun stuff. Kendra, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for everything that you do for New York trucking.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure, Zach.
If you like the content you see, please subscribe, and we'll see you next time on stream.